Have you ever noticed how some of the strongest, most unshakable people you've met seem perfectly fine being alone? They walk into a room and they don't need attention, they don't need approval, they don't need validation, they don't beg to be included. They carry themselves with a presence that makes you stop and wonder what's different about them. It's because they've discovered something most people run away from: the power of solitude. See, the world conditions us to believe that being alone is weakness, that if you're not constantly surrounded by people, constantly socializing, constantly keeping busy, then you're missing out. But what if I told you the opposite is true? What if I told you that your greatest strength, your sharpest clarity, your deepest growth comes not when you're surrounded by noise, but when you're alone in the quiet? There's a reason most people fear solitude. It strips away distractions. It forces you to face yourself. It leaves you with no one to blame, no one to compare to, no excuses to hide behind. And that's uncomfortable. But let me tell you something. If you can sit with yourself in silence and not run, if you can embrace solitude and learn to use it, then you become unstoppable. Because solitude is not emptiness. Solitude is strength. It's where transformation begins. Most people spend their lives chasing crowds. But the ones who learn to master solitude, those are the people who lead, the people who create, the people who stand unshaken, no matter who stays or leaves. And today, I want you to see solitude for what it really is. Not loneliness, not punishment, but your superpower. When you spend time in solitude, you begin a process most people avoid their entire lives: facing yourself. It sounds simple, but it's not. Because when you strip away the distractions, the noise, the opinions of others, you're left with the raw truth of who you are. And truth can be uncomfortable. Most people surround themselves with noise for a reason. They're afraid of what they might find if they sit alone with their own thoughts. But here's where the magic happens. If you can face yourself honestly without running, you develop something that few people in this world ever achieve: self-mastery. Think about it. How often do you see people chasing approval, constantly seeking likes, validation, or someone else's opinion before they can feel good about themselves? That's not mastery. That's dependency. They are controlled by the outside world. If someone claps for them, they feel worthy. If someone criticizes them, they feel broken. Their emotional state is like a seesaw, up and down depending on who pays attention. But when you practice solitude, you train yourself to find validation within. You stop living on emotional credit from other people. You build your own reserves of strength. That is self-mastery. In solitude, there is no audience to impress, no one to fake it for, no mask to wear. It's just you in the mirror, and that's where discipline is born. You learn to control your impulses because there's no one to entertain them. You learn to handle your emotions because there's no one to absorb your outbursts. You learn to think clearly because there's no constant chatter distracting your mind. When you're alone, every weakness in you becomes visible. But instead of running from it, you get the chance to deal with it. That is how you master yourself. Self-mastery means you are no longer controlled by your fears, your insecurities, or your need for approval. You begin to recognize your triggers and stop being reactive. You start choosing your responses instead of exploding with emotion. That's powerful. Imagine how different your life becomes when you're no longer a puppet pulled by strings of outside influence. Imagine walking into a room and not needing anyone's validation, not being shaken by anyone's rejection. That's the kind of presence solitude builds in you. And let's be real, most people never reach this point. They fear solitude because it strips them of excuses. It forces them to confront their flaws, their failures, their regrets. But the strongest people in this world are the ones who've walked through that fire. They face their own demons in solitude. And instead of letting those demons define them, they learn to control them. That's why they're calm when everyone else is panicking. That's why they remain focused when everyone else is distracted. That's why they're unshakable when life hits hard. They've been training in the quiet, mastering themselves in the shadows. When you give yourself solitude, you give yourself room to hear your own voice. Not the voice of your friends, Not the voice of society, not the voice of people telling you who you should be, but your voice. And when you start to listen, you begin to uncover your real values, your real desires, your real boundaries. That clarity is priceless, because once you know who you are, nobody can manipulate you. Nobody can convince you to sell yourself short. Nobody can talk you into living a life that doesn't belong to you. That's the power of self-mastery born in solitude. Think about the people you admire, leaders, thinkers, creators, warriors. Every single one of them had to learn solitude. They had to learn how to train their mind, discipline their emotions, and sharpen their focus when no one was watching. That's the part you don't see. You see the results, the confidence, the achievements, the respect. But behind all of it was countless hours of solitude, of wrestling with self-doubt, of building resilience brick by brick. And here's the truth, when you master yourself, you stop being desperate for control over other people. You stop trying to change them or force them to fit your expectations. Why? Because you already know how to control the hardest person you'll ever deal with, yourself. That gives you a sense of calm that can't be shaken. People feel it when you walk into a room. They sense the discipline, the stability, the quiet power. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. True mastery doesn't need to shout it. Speaks for itself. But let me warn you, self-mastery through solitude is not easy. It requires courage. It requires patience. It requires you to be brutally honest with yourself. You'll discover things you don't like. You'll confront habits you need to break. You'll face emotions you've buried for years. That's why most people quit. But if you can endure that discomfort, if you can sit through the silence and use it, you will rise above the average. Because while everyone else is busy distracting themselves, you're building yourself. At the end of the day, solitude is the gym where your mind trains. It's where your emotions are disciplined. It's where your spirit becomes unbreakable. And once you've built that foundation, nobody can take it from you. You'll walk through life with a strength people can't quite explain, but they'll feel it. That is the gift of solitude. That is the path to self-mastery. Silence has a way of revealing truths that noise will always bury. When you step away from the constant chatter of the world, you start to realize just how much of your life has been influenced by voices that are not your own. Every day you're bombarded with opinions, expectations, advertisements, and demands. Everyone wants your attention, and everyone wants to tell you who you should be, how you should live, what you should buy, and even what you should feel. It's endless noise, and if you don't break away from it, you'll never actually hear yourself. That's why silence is powerful. In silence, the fog clears. In silence, you find direction. In silence, you discover clarity. Most people don't even recognize how much the noise controls them. They mistake other people's voices for their own. They confuse society's pressure with their own desires. That's why so many live unfulfilled lives. They're following scripts that were written for them, not by them. But when you enter silence, when you embrace solitude, you cut out the interference. You unplug from the system. You give your mind the space to breathe. And suddenly, you start noticing things you missed. The ideas buried underneath. The feelings you've been suppressing. The truths you've been too afraid to admit. That is where clarity is born. Clarity doesn't come from busyness. It doesn't come from rushing through life, checking off boxes, or constantly filling every minute with activity. Clarity comes when you slow down enough to listen. It comes when you stop running from yourself, long enough to hear what your own spirit has been trying to tell you. The reason so many people make poor decisions, the reason they settle, the reason they end up in places they never wanted to be, is because they never stopped long enough to ask themselves, is this really what I want? Is this truly who I am? Silence is uncomfortable for many because it forces them to face those questions. And those questions reveal when you're living out of alignment. They reveal when you've been chasing approval instead of purpose. They reveal when you've been ignoring your intuition. Silence has a way of exposing lies, and that's why it feels unsettling. Because deep down, you already know the truth, but the noise helps you avoid it. When you turn off the noise, the truth comes forward, and you can't ignore it anymore. Well, that's a gift, because truth is the foundation of clarity. Without truth, you will always be lost. Think about the most important decisions in life, the ones that determine your future, your relationships, your career, your happiness. Those decisions cannot be made in the heat of chaos. They require stillness. They require thought. They require the kind of inner space that only solitude provides. Some of the greatest breakthroughs people experience come not in moments of noise, but in moments of quiet reflection. That's when the vision becomes clear. That's when you suddenly know the answer you've been searching for. That's when you finally see the path that's been right in front of you all along. Noise clouds judgment. Silence clears it. Noise pushes you to react. Silence helps you respond. Noise keeps you running in circles. Silence shows you the way out. That's why you need it, because without clarity, you waste years chasing the wrong things, investing in the wrong people, and fighting the wrong battles. Clarity protects you from wasting your life. Let's be real, clarity is power. When you know what you want, you stop being tossed around by other people's agendas. When you know who you are, manipulation stops working on you. When you know your direction, distractions lose their power. The reason many people feel so anxious, so restless, so unfulfilled is because they lack clarity. They're chasing everything, but committing to nothing. They're listening to everyone, but ignoring themselves. Silence fixes that. It aligns you with your value. It points you toward what truly matters. Silence also sharpens your intuition. Call it instinct, call it inner wisdom, call it gut feeling. It doesn't matter. It's real. And when you silence the outside world, that inner voice grows louder. You start trusting yourself more. You start recognizing when something feels right or wrong. You start making decisions not from fear or pressure, but from a deep knowing. That's the kind of clarity that saves you from mistakes, from regrets, from wasted time. But here's the challenge. Silence takes discipline. We live in a world that hates silence. Every gap is filled with scrolling, music, talking, distractions. People can't sit still without reaching for a phone, without turning on a screen, without seeking stimulation. Silence feels boring, even unbearable. But that's only because they haven't trained themselves to see its value. If you can push past that initial discomfort and embrace silence, you'll realize it's not empty. It's full of answers, full of insight, full of wisdom you can't find anywhere else. Think of silence as sharpening a blade. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, your mind gets dull. You're scattered, tired, and unclear. But when you sit in silence, you hone your thoughts. You refine your focus. You cut away what doesn't matter. And just like a blade, you become precise. You can cut through confusion. You can cut through lies. You can cut through doubt. That's the clarity silence gives you. Imagine walking into life with that kind of clarity. You know where you're going. You know who you are. You know what you stand for. You stop wasting time in toxic environments. You stop giving energy to people who drain you. You stop chasing things that don't align with your purpose. Instead, every move you make is intentional. Every step you take is aligned. That's the difference between drifting through life and living with direction. And the bridge between those two is silent. Clarity comes when you choose to step back, when you turn off the noise, when you stop letting the world drown out your own thoughts. And once you find it, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. Because life becomes simpler, cleaner, and more powerful when you're not blinded by noise. And that's the gift solitude offers, the silence that gives you vision. Strength is not built when life is easy, when everything is going your way, when you're constantly surrounded by comfort. Strength is born when you're tested, and solitude is one of the greatest tests you will ever face. Most people cannot handle being alone. The moment they feel the weight of silence, they panic. They rush to fill it with people, distractions, anything to avoid sitting with themselves. But those who learn to endure solitude, those who make peace with it, discover a kind of resilience that nothing in the world can shake. Think about it. How many people do you know who stay in unhealthy relationships, toxic friendships, or draining environments, simply because they are afraid of being alone. They'd rather tolerate disrespect than face solitude. That's not strength. That's fear. And fear is weakness. When you learn to embrace solitude, you free yourself from that fear. You no longer cling to people out of desperation. You stop tolerating what doesn't serve you. You realize that your survival, your peace, your happiness is not dependent on anyone else. That's resilience. When you can stand alone and not crumble. Resilience isn't about pretending you don't feel pain. It's about having the capacity to endure pain without letting it break you. Solitude builds that capacity. When you spend time alone, you learn to comfort yourself, to encourage yourself, to pick yourself up when life knocks you down. You stop waiting for someone to rescue you or validate you. You become your own backbone. That doesn't mean you shut out the world or refuse support. It means you're no longer dependent on it. You don't collapse when support isn't there. You know how to keep moving forward even when no one is clapping, even when no one is standing by your side. That's resilience. When you can sit in solitude without fear, you discover that loneliness isn't something to be scared of. It's something to master. Most people confuse solitude with loneliness, but they're not the same. Loneliness is when you depend on others to fill your emptiness. Solitude is when you choose to be with yourself because you're whole enough to handle it. The moment you understand this, your resilience skyrockets. Because what can the world take from you if you're already complete on your own? What can rejection do to you if you've already learned to stand without being accepted? What can abandonment do if you've already built peace within yourself? That's real power. Resilient people are not unbreakable because life never hurts them. They're unbreakable because they've trained in solitude. They faced their insecurities in the quiet. They felt the sting of rejection, the weight of silence, the fear of being alone, and they've survived it. Every time you survive solitude, you get stronger. Every time you spend time alone and grow instead of breaking, you build another layer of resilience. And those layers protect you when storms come. Life will test you. People will leave. Situations will collapse. Plans will fail. But if you've practiced resilience in solitude, you won't shatter. You'll bend, but you won't break. You'll hurt, but you'll heal. Because solitude has already taught you how to endure, how to hold yourself together, how to stand when everything around you is falling apart. That's why the strongest people often carry a kind of calm presence. They don't panic when others panic. They don't crumble when others crumble. They've already fought battles in silence, so the noise of the world doesn't shake them anymore. Resilience is also about emotional control. When you're constantly surrounded by people, it's easy to get reactive, snapping at every comment, feeding off other people's emotions, letting their moods dictate yours. But solitude teaches you to regulate yourself. You learn patience. You learn how to sit with frustration instead of exploding. You learn how to calm your mind instead of spiraling. That emotional discipline is resilience. Because no matter what happens outside, you have control inside. And once you master that, you can walk through fire and not burn out. Think about this. If the only reason you feel strong is because people are cheering for you, what happens when the cheering stops? If the only reason you feel happy is because someone else is giving you attention, what happens when that attention fades? If your confidence only exists when you're surrounded by a crowd, what happens when you're left alone? That's why solitude is essential. It forces you to develop strength that doesn't depend on external factors. Strength that's rooted deep within you. Strength that stays even when circumstances change. That's resilience. And here's another truth. Resilience built in solitude makes you harder to manipulate. When you're afraid of being alone, people can control you. They know you'll bend your boundaries, tolerate mistreatment, or betray yourself just to avoid solitude. But when you're not afraid to stand alone, you become untouchable. Nobody can dangle abandonment over your head. Nobody can threaten you with rejection. Nobody can trap you in fear of being left out. Because you've already faced that fear in solitude and you've conquered it. That's what resilience looks like in its purest form. It's not easy. Sitting in solitude can feel heavy. The silence can feel like it's crushing you, but with time, that silence becomes your teacher. It teaches you patience, it teaches you endurance, it teaches you how to sit in discomfort without running away. And once you've mastered that, life becomes easier. Because if you can survive the silence, you can survive the noise. If you can stand strong when you're alone, you'll be even stronger when you're supported. So the next time life pushes you into solitude, don't fight it. Don't see it as punishment. See it as training. See it as the gym where your resilience is built. Every moment you spend alone is an opportunity to grow stronger, to become more independent, to master yourself. And when the world sees you walking with that resilience, calm, steady, unshaken, they'll know you've tapped into a power they can't quite understand. The power of solitude. Growth doesn't happen in the middle of constant noise. Creativity doesn't blossom when you're distracted every second of the day. To truly grow, to truly create, you need space. You need stillness. You need solitude. And yet that's the very thing people run from. They crowd their schedules. They fill every gap with chatter. They keep themselves busy, not because they're productive, but because they're afraid of what silence might reveal. What they don't realize is that solitude is not a prison. Solitude is the workshop of greatness. It's where growth takes place, and it's where creativity is born. Think about it. Every major breakthrough in history, every invention, every work of art, every strategy that shaped the world, it came from someone who was willing to step away from the noise and sit with their own thoughts. No masterpiece was created in a crowd. No vision was discovered in the middle of chaos. Growth and creativity need room to breathe, and solitude is that room. When you give yourself time alone, you allow your mind to wander freely. You allow your thoughts to connect in new ways. You give yourself the chance to reflect, to analyze, to imagine. That's the soil where creativity grows. But it's not just about ideas. Solitude fuels personal growth because it removes distractions. When you're constantly surrounded by people, you absorb their habits, their beliefs, their opinions. Without even realizing it, you start to copy them. You start to live in ways that may not even belong to you. In solitude, you step away from that influence. You begin to ask, who am I really? What do I believe? What do I want? Those questions can't be answered in a crowd. They can only be answered in silence. And once you start answering them, you begin to grow into your own person. You stop being a reflection of others and start becoming a reflection of your true self. Growth also comes from self-awareness. And self-awareness doesn't happen when you're distracted. It happens when you take the time to reflect. In solitude, you start noticing patterns in your behavior. You start identifying the habits that hold you back. You start recognizing the beliefs that no longer serve you. That awareness is the first step toward growth, because you can't change what you don't acknowledge. Solitude forces you to acknowledge. It shines a light on the areas of your life that need work, and it gives you the space to do the work. Creativity thrives in the same way. When you're constantly plugged into other people's voices, your creativity is limited. You're recycling ideas, you're copying trends. But when you're alone, your imagination is free. You start coming up with solutions nobody else has thought of. You start connecting dots nobody else has noticed. That's why some of the most creative people in history guarded their solitude fiercely. They knew that the quiet was not empty, it was full of possibilities. But solitude does something else for growth. It builds discipline. Because let's be honest, solitude can feel boring. It's easy to waste it scrolling, watching, distracting yourself. True solitude, the kind that fuels growth, requires you to discipline your time. It requires you to read, to write, to think, to create. And when you use solitude this way, you sharpen your mind. You expand your knowledge. You push yourself beyond comfort. That's where growth happens, in the discomfort of pushing yourself to do the work no one else sees. Solitude is also where dreams are shaped into plans. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, You might have flashes of inspiration, but you don't have the space to build on them. Alone, you can take those sparks and develop them into strategy. You can break down goals, design steps, visualize outcomes. Growth isn't just about dreaming, it's about structuring those dreams into something real. And you can't do that in a crowd pulling you in different directions. You do it in solitude, where focus is sharp and distractions are gone. Another important truth: growth and creativity require vulnerability. You have to be willing to fail, to try, to stumble, to start again. But most people are too afraid to look foolish in front of others. In solitude, you have the freedom to experiment without judgment. You can brainstorm wild ideas. You can write pages nobody will read. You can sketch, plan, practice, and fail in peace. And every failure teaches you something. Every attempt makes you better. That's growth. That's creativity. And it's only possible when you give yourself permission to step into solitude. You also have to understand that solitude connects you to something bigger. Call it inspiration, call it inner wisdom, whatever it is, it gets drowned out in noise. But in solitude, it comes alive. Suddenly new ideas flow. Suddenly insights drop into your mind. Suddenly you see solutions where before you only saw problems. That's not an accident. That's what happens when you create stillness. Growth isn't just about effort. It's also about alignment. And solitude aligns you with your deeper self. Some of the most powerful transformations happen when you spend time alone. You might pick up a book and discover a perspective that shifts your entire mindset. You might journal and uncover emotions that have been holding you back. You might meditate and release stress that's been weighing you down. You might brainstorm an idea that turns into a business, a project, or a movement. These things don't happen when you're drowning in constant noise. They happen in the quiet moments of solitude, where growth and creativity can breathe. So instead of running from solitude, embrace it. See it as your training ground. See it as your creative lab. See it as your growth accelerator. Every minute you invest in solitude is a minute invested in yourself, your mind, your vision, your future. And when you come back from that solitude, you'll return stronger, wiser, more creative, more focused. You'll bring with you ideas that others never thought of, growth that others never achieved, strength that others never built. Because you dared to do what most people fear. You chose solitude, and you used it. Most people enter relationships from a place of need, not from a place of strength. They're afraid of being alone, so they cling to whoever gives them attention. They settle for less because solitude terrifies them. And when you build relationships out of fear, they rarely turn into anything healthy. But when you've mastered solitude, when you've learned how to stand on your own, you bring an entirely different energy into your relationship. You no longer choose people because you need them. You choose them because you want them. That distinction is power. When you're comfortable with solitude, you don't chase people who don't value you. You don't beg for crumbs of attention. You don't tolerate disrespect. Why? Because you know you're capable of standing alone. You're not afraid of walking away. You don't see solitude as a punishment. You see it as a position of strength. That makes you incredibly hard to manipulate. Nobody can trap you with threats of abandonment because you're not afraid of being by yourself. Nobody can control you with silent treatment because silence is already your ally. That's the power solitude gives you in relationships. It sets you free from desperation. Healthy relationships are built on choice, not dependence. When you've embraced solitude, you stop expecting another person to complete you. You already feel whole. You already know who you are. You already know what you stand for. That means you don't approach relationships looking for someone to fix your emptiness. You approach them ready to share your fullness. And that's when love, friendship, and connection become genuine. They're not transactions to fill a void. They're partnerships based on mutual respect and strength. Solitude also teaches you boundaries. When you're afraid of being alone, you'll let people cross lines they should never cross. You'll keep giving chances even when it hurts you. But when solitude is your superpower, you set clear boundaries because you're not afraid of what happens if someone leaves. You value your peace more than temporary company. And ironically, that's what attracts healthier people to you, because real strength draws respect. When you respect yourself enough to be okay alone, others are forced to respect you too. Another hidden gift of solitude in relationships is clarity. When you take time away from constant interaction, you see people for who they really are. You notice red flags you would have ignored if you were too busy clinging to them. You see the dynamics clearly. Who adds value? Who drains your energy? Who respects you? Who only uses you? Solitude creates the distance needed to evaluate your connections honestly. Without it, you risk losing yourself in the noise of constant interaction. With it, you protect yourself from giving your energy to the wrong people. Solitude also strengthens emotional balance. If you're always relying on others for happiness, your mood swings with their behavior. One compliment lifts you, one criticism crushes you. That makes relationships unstable. But solitude teaches you to regulate your emotions. You learn how to soothe yourself, how to encourage yourself, how to ground yourself. That means you're not constantly draining your partner, your friends, or your family by demanding they carry all your emotions. You come into relationships as an anchor, not a storm. That makes your presence calming, not chaotic. And people are drawn to that kind of steadiness. The truth is, when you're comfortable in solitude, you raise your standards. You stop tolerating half-hearted love, shallow friendships, and fake connections. Because you already know how to enjoy your own company. You're not desperate for just any company. If someone wants to be in your life, they have to add value. They have to match your energy. They have to respect your boundaries. And if they can't, you're fine walking away. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you wise. It means you've learned that peace is better than fake companionship, and solitude is better than toxic love. People sometimes mistake this strength for arrogance. But it's not arrogance, it's self-respect. Solitude teaches you that your time, your energy, and your peace are precious. You don't hand them out carelessly anymore. You protect them. And when you do choose to share them, it's intentional. That intentionality transforms relationships, because when you give your love, your attention, your loyalty, it's not out of fear, it's out of genuine choice. And that makes it 10 times more powerful. Another thing solitude gives you in relationships is patience. When you're afraid of being alone, you rush into connections. You force relationships that aren't ready. You cling to people who aren't right for you. But when you're at peace in solitude, you don't rush. You wait for the right fit. You wait for people who align with your values. You're not desperate for attention, so you can filter with clarity. That patience pays off. It saves you from heartbreaks and wasted time. It gives you the courage to say no to almost right so you can hold out for right. And let's not forget, solitude also makes you more attractive. There's something magnetic about someone who doesn't need the crowd, who doesn't beg for validation, who carries themselves with quiet confidence. People sense it. They feel that you're whole on your own. That self-sufficiency creates respect. It creates admiration. It draws people who want to add to your strength, not take advantage of your weakness. Because true strength is rare, and when people see it, they want to be near it. So in the end, solitude doesn't make you anti-relationship. It makes you better at them. It makes you selective, intentional, grounded, and strong. It protects you from manipulation. It frees you from desperation. It sharpens your clarity, builds your boundaries, and deepens your self-respect. It allows you to love from a place of strength instead of weakness. And when you can do that, your relationships transform. They stop being survival mechanisms and start being genuine connections. That's why solitude is power in relationships. Because when you no longer fear being alone, you'll never again settle for less than you deserve. You'll choose people not because you need them, but because you respect them, because you value them, because together you can grow. That's the kind of connection worth having. And it all begins with the strength you build in solitude. When you look at everything we've covered, self-mastery, clarity, resilience, creativity, and the power solitude gives you in relationships, you realize something profound. Solitude was never your weakness. It was never emptiness. It was never punishment. Solitude is the furnace where strength is forged, the mirror where truth is revealed, the soil where creativity blooms, and the foundation where real love and connection. Most people run from being alone. They fill every quiet moment with noise, distraction, and people who don't even deserve a seat at their table. But if you're willing to sit with yourself, if you're willing to face the silence, you will find out who you really are. And once you know who you are, the world cannot take that from you. No rejection can break you. No betrayal can define you. No loss can destroy you, because you've already learned the secret. Your strength doesn't come from outside validation. It comes from within. Solitude makes you dangerous in the best way. Dangerous because you cannot be manipulated. Dangerous because you cannot be rushed. Dangerous because you're not desperate. Dangerous because you're free. And freedom, true freedom, comes when you are not afraid to walk alone. So don't fear solitude, embrace it. Let it sharpen you. Let it strip away the noise. Let it show you who you really are. And when you step back into the world, you won't walk in as someone begging to belong. You'll walk in as someone who belongs anywhere they choose to stand. Your solitude is not your weakness. It is your superpower. Use it, protect it, live it, and watch how your life transforms.